This might be one of the most shocking stories blowing up online right now. Because within hours, the internet went from quiet speculation to full-blown panic. And at the center of it all, Boosie Pooh Shiesty. And a story so intense, so unbelievable, that people are still asking, wait, is this even real? It all started when posts began circulating claiming that both Boosie and Pooh Shiesty were tied to something much darker than anyone expected. Not just legal trouble, not just controversy, but something far more serious. Now, here's the thing. No official confirmation, no clear statement, just a wave of viral claims, headlines, and reactions that spread faster than anyone could control. And that's when things got dangerous, because the moment those claims hit social media, people didn't wait. They reacted hard. Some were shocked, and some didn't believe it, and others. They started digging. Old clips resurfaced. Past situations were brought back, and suddenly everything felt connected in a way that made people uncomfortable. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because while the internet was spiraling, something strange happened. Silence. No immediate clarification. No clear denial. And that silence? It made everything louder. Because now people are asking, what's actually going on behind the scenes? Why is this blowing up right now? And most importantly, is there something we're not being told? Stay with me. Because what's really happening here is way more complicated than it looks. To understand why this situation is exploding the way it is, you have to separate two things. What's real, and what the internet is turning into something much bigger. Because right now, those two are colliding, and that's what's creating the chaos. Let's start with Boosie, a name that's been in the spotlight for years. Outspoken, unfiltered, always in the middle of controversy, whether it's his opinions, his past, or the way he moves publicly. Boosie has built a reputation on saying exactly what he thinks, no matter the consequences. And because of that, he's constantly watched, constantly analyzed, constantly one headline away from trending. Now bring in Pooh Shiesty, a completely different energy, but just as intense. Rising fast, gaining attention, and already dealing with legal situations that have kept his name circulating in the media. And that's important. Because when someone is already connected to legal headlines, it becomes very easy for the internet to take that and build something bigger around it. Now imagine these two names being mentioned together, in the same sentence, in the middle of a viral claim. That alone is enough to spark attention. But what turned this into chaos wasn't just the names. It was the way the story started spreading. Because this didn't come from one clear source. It didn't come from an official report. It came from multiple posts, multiple pages, multiple voices, all saying slightly different things. And that's where things get messy. Because when information isn't clear, people fill in the gaps. And the more gaps there are, the more dramatic the story becomes. And some posts claimed there were confessions. Others talked about sentencing. Some even suggested that everything had already happened behind the scenes. But here's the problem. None of it came with clear, confirmed details. No official documents, no verified statements. Just momentum. And once something gains momentum online, it doesn't slow down, it spreads. Now here's where things take a deeper turn. Because while the internet was reacting to these claims, people started connecting them to past situations. Old clips, old interviews, old moments where Boosie spoke about certain topics, or where Pooh Shiesty was already dealing with legal attention. And suddenly, everything felt connected. Even if it wasn't, that's how fast narratives form online. And one piece of information leads to another. And before you know it, you have a full story that feels real, even if parts of it are still unclear. But here's the key detail that made this situation even more intense. Because while all of this was happening, there was no immediate clear response, no quick shutdown, no direct clarification, and that silence, it created space. Space for speculation. Space for theories. Space for people to start believing the worst Because when something serious is being said, and no one steps in to correct it right away, people start asking questions, and those questions, they turn into assumptions. Now think about how fast this escalated. Within hours, the story went from, "Did you see this post?" to, "Is this actually true?" to, "Why isn't anyone denying it?" And that last question, that's the one that changed everything. Because once people start questioning the silence, the story becomes bigger than the original claim. It becomes about what's not being said. And right now, there's a lot not being said. But here's where things get even more complicated. Because while some people are reacting emotionally, others are stepping back and asking a different question. Who started this? Because stories like this don't just appear out of nowhere. They start somewhere. And when you trace it back, the origin isn't always what you expect. Some believe this was a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. Others think it was intentional. Something dropped online knowing it would go viral. And then there are those who believe this might be connected to something bigger that hasn't fully come out yet. Now again, nothing is confirmed. But the fact that people are even thinking this way, that tells you how intense the situation has become. Because when a story reaches this level, it's no longer just about facts. It's about perception. And perception. That's what drives everything online. Meanwhile, both Boosie and Pooh Shiesty remain at the center of this storm. Whether they've said anything or not, whether they're aware of how big this has become or not, their names are everywhere. And that alone is enough to keep the story alive. Because the more people talk, the more it spreads. The more it spreads, the harder it is to stop. But here's the thing, because everything we've talked about so far, the rumors, the reactions, the confusion, that's just the buildup. Because what really pushed this situation into overdrive was the moment people started treating the claims like they were already true. And trust me, that's when everything went from speculation to something much more serious. And this is where everything completely spiraled out of control. Because the moment those claims stopped being just rumors and started being treated like facts, the entire internet flipped. What was once confusion turned into panic. What was once curiosity turned into outrage. And what was once speculation became a full-blown narrative that people believed was real. Posts started going viral with bold captions. No question marks, no hesitation, statements, claims, accusations. And the craziest part? Most of them were coming from accounts that weren't verified. But we're speaking with complete confidence. And that's how it spread so fast. Because when something is said with certainty, people don't always question it. They react. And that reaction, it fueled everything. Some users began saying things like, "See, I knew something like this was coming." Others claimed, "This explains everything we've been hearing." And just like that, a story that wasn't clearly confirmed started feeling real to thousands of people. But here's where things take a sharp turn. Because as the narrative kept growing, people started digging. Not just reacting anymore, investigating. Old videos resurfaced, clips of Boosie speaking on past situations, moments where Pooh Shiesty had already been dealing with legal headlines, and suddenly, everything was being reinterpreted. Things that once meant nothing now felt like clues. And that's when the situation crossed into dangerous territory. Because when people start connecting unrelated moments, they create a story that feels complete, even if it isn't. But then, the first twist hit, and it changed everything. Because just as the internet was reaching its peak, when people were fully convinced they understood what was happening, a new piece of information started circulating. And this one didn't confirm the claims. It challenged them. Some users began pointing out inconsistencies, details that didn't match, timelines that didn't add up. And suddenly, a new question entered the conversation. Wait, where is the actual proof? Now pause, because that question, it slowed everything down, even if just for a moment. Because up until that point, people weren't asking for proof. They were reacting to emotion, but now, logic started creeping in. And once that happens, the narrative starts to crack. Some users began calling out the original posts, saying they were exaggerated, misleading, or completely taken out of context. Others went further, suggesting that the entire situation may have been blown out of proportion from the start. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because while some people were starting to question the story, others doubled down hard. They weren't backing off. They weren't reconsidering. They were pushing the narrative even further, adding new details, new claims, new layers that made the situation feel even more serious than before. And now, the internet was split, not just into believers and skeptics, but into two completely different realities. One side convinced something major had happened, now the other side convinced it was all being exaggerated. And both sides fighting to prove they were right. Meanwhile, something else started happening behind the scenes. Because as the story grew, silence continued. No clear statement, no direct clarification. And that silence, it kept feeding both sides. Because for believers, it meant they're not denying it. And for skeptics, it meant they don't even need to respond to something this ridiculous. Same silence, two completely different interpretations. And that's what made this situation even more chaotic. But here's where the twist deepens. Because just when people thought they had reached the peak of confusion, another claim started circulating. And this one? This one flipped everything again. According to a new wave of posts, the original story may not have been completely fabricated, but it may have been misrepresented. Let that sink in, because that means there could be a small piece of truth somewhere, but it's being stretched, twisted, and amplified into something much bigger. And if that's the case, then what people are reacting to right now isn't the truth. It's a version of it, and that's dangerous. Because once a version of the truth takes over, it's almost impossible to correct. But it doesn't stop there, because another detail started emerging. Quietly at first, but gaining attention fast. Some users began suggesting that this entire situation might have been triggered intentionally. Not necessarily fake, but pushed, amplified, given just enough attention to make it explode. Now think about that. Because if someone wanted this to go viral, if someone knew it would create chaos, then this isn't just a random situation, it's a chain reaction. And once that reaction starts, it's almost impossible to control. Because look at what's happening now. Millions of views, thousands of comments, endless debates, and two names, Boosie and Pooh Shiesty, at the center of it all. Whether the claims are true, exaggerated, or misunderstood, the impact is real, and that's what matters in moments like this. Because once a story reaches this level, it doesn't just disappear, it evolves, it grows, it pulls more people into it, and eventually, it forces a response. But here's the real problem. Because right now, no one knows exactly what's real. No one knows exactly what's been confirmed. And yet, everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a version of the story they believe. And that's what makes this situation so intense. Because when reality and perception start to blur, anything can happen next. And trust me, what happens next is where things go from confusing to completely out of control. And just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any more chaotic, it did. Because what started as confusion turned into something much bigger, something louder, something that felt like it was spiraling out of control in real time. Within hours, the conversation shifted again. It wasn't just about the claims anymore, it was about the reaction to the claims. Because now, bigger pages started picking it up. Larger audiences. More visibility. More people jumping in, some trying to explain, others just reacting emotionally without even checking what was real. And that's when the situation reached a new level. Because once major platforms start amplifying something, it doesn't just spread, it explodes. Now timelines were flooded. Videos, breakdowns, commentary clips. Everyone had their own version of the story. And the more people talked about it, the more real it started to feel, even for those who weren't sure at first. But here's where things take a darker turn. Because as the story kept growing, a new detail started surfacing. And this one? This one made people pause. According to several posts that began gaining traction, the original claims might have been based on a completely different situation. One that got misunderstood, reworded, and then pushed into something far more serious. Now think about that. Yeah, because if that's true, then what people are reacting to right now isn't even the original story. It's a distorted version of it. And once something gets distorted online, it takes on a life of its own. But here's the shocking reveal. Because just when people started realizing that something might be off, a deeper explanation began circulating. One that broke down how the entire situation may have escalated step by step. It started with a small claim. That claim got reposted, then reworded, then exaggerated, then picked up by bigger accounts. And before anyone could slow it down, it turned into a headline that felt real. Now pause. Because that right there, that's how viral chaos is created. Not from one lie, not from one truth, but from layers of misunderstanding stacked on top of each other until no one can tell the difference anymore. Yeah, and that's exactly what seems to have happened here. But it doesn't stop there, because as people started tracing the story back to its origin, something else became clear. The original source wasn't even as dramatic as what people were now reacting to, which means everything that came after was built on interpretation. And that's when the entire situation flipped again. Because now, instead of asking, "Is this true?" people started asking, "How did this even get this big?" And that question, it changed everything. Because now, the focus isn't just on Boosie and Pooh Shiesty anymore. It's on the internet itself. How fast things spread, how quickly narratives form, how easily something can go from unclear to completely out of control. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because even with this new understanding, the chaos didn't stop. In fact, it split into two completely different directions. One side began pulling back, questioning everything, calling out the exaggeration, trying to slow the narrative down, but the other side, they kept pushing, still believing, still reacting, still treating the story like it was real. And that's the problem. Because once a story reaches that level, even when doubts appear, it doesn't disappear. It continues in pieces, in fragments, in conversations that keep it alive. And that's exactly what's happening now. Meanwhile, something else started to shift. Because as the narrative began to crack, silence turned into something else. Movement. Subtle at first, but noticeable. Posts disappearing, comments being deleted. Some accounts that originally pushed the story suddenly going quiet, and that alone raised even more questions, because now people are asking, if it wasn't real, why is everything being taken down? And if it was exaggerated, why did it spread so fast in the first place? And just like that, the confusion came back, stronger than before. Because now it's not just about the story, it's about the aftermath. What's being said? What's being removed? What's being ignored? And what's still being pushed? But here's the most unsettling part. Because just when people thought things might start calming down, another claim began circulating, this time saying that there might be more information coming. More context, more clarification, maybe even a direct response. And whether that's true or not, it's enough to keep people locked in, waiting and watching, refreshing their feeds. Because now the story isn't just about what already happened. It's about what's coming next. And that's what makes this situation so unpredictable. Because at any moment, something new could drop. Something that either confirms everything or completely shuts it down. But until that happens, we're stuck in this space. Between truth and speculation. Between fact and exaggeration. Between what people believe and what might actually be real. And trust me, that's where things get the most dangerous. Because when no one knows the full truth, anything can happen next. And right now, it feels like we're right on the edge of that moment. And this This is where everything went completely out of control. Because once the story reached this level, it didn't just stay on a few pages, it took over the internet. Timelines were flooded. Group chats were blowing up. People who weren't even following the situation suddenly found themselves pulled into it. And the craziest part? Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the full story. And that's exactly why it went viral the way it did. Because confusion? That's what drives engagement. And right now, confusion was everywhere. On one side, you had people reacting emotionally. Shock, anger, disbelief. Some users were posting things like, "This is insane. If this is true, everything just changed." Others said, "I don't even know what to believe anymore, but this feels serious." And those reactions? They spread fast, because emotion spreads faster than facts. But on the other side, a completely different energy. Skepticism, doubt, frustration, people questioning everything. One viral comment read, "Where is the actual proof? Everyone is just repeating the same thing." Another said, "This is what happens when the internet runs with a story before checking anything." And just like that, the internet split in two. Believers versus skeptics. Reaction versus logic. And both sides? Louder than ever. But here's where things get even more intense. Because it wasn't just regular users reacting, it was bigger voices, influencers, content creators, people with large audiences who started weighing in. Some tried to break the situation down, explaining how misinformation spreads, warning people not to jump to conclusions, but others, they leaned into the chaos, posting dramatic takes, amplifying the story even more. Because, let's be real, drama gets views. And this situation, it had all the ingredients. Big names, long serious claims, confusion, emotion. It was built to go viral. And that's exactly what happened. Meanwhile, something else started happening behind the scenes. Quietly, but noticeably, some of the accounts that originally pushed the story started pulling back, deleting posts, removing captions, going silent. And that raised even more questions, because now people are asking, if nothing was confirmed, why delete anything? But at the same time, others were still pushing it, still posting, still acting like everything was true. And that created a strange situation where two completely different versions of reality were existing at the same time. One side trying to correct the narrative, the other side continuing to spread it, and right in the middle, everyone else, trying to figure out what to believe. Yeah, but here's the part that really pushed things over the edge. Because as the debate got louder, a new wave of reactions came in, people stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. Not just this situation, but how situations like this happen in general. One post that went viral said, "This isn't just about them. This is about how fast we turn rumors into facts." Another wrote, "By the time the truth comes out, people have already decided what they believe." And those posts, they hit differently, because they weren't just reacting to the story, they were reacting to the system, the way information spreads, the way narratives form, the way people choose sides before knowing the full truth. And suddenly, the conversation changed again. Because now it's not just about Boosie and Pooh Shiesty. It's about the internet itself. How powerful it is, how fast it moves, and how dangerous it can be when things aren't clear. But even with that awareness, the chaos didn't stop. Because once something reaches this level of attention, it doesn't just disappear. It lingers, it evolves. It keeps showing up in different forms. Different posts, different conversations, different interpretations. And that's exactly what's happening now. Some people are still fully convinced. Others are completely skeptical. And most, somewhere in between. Watching, waiting, trying to see what happens next. Because at this point, everyone knows one thing for sure. This story isn't finished, not even close. Because when something blows up like this, there's always a next phase, a response, a clarification, a moment where everything either gets confirmed or completely shut down. And right now, the entire internet is waiting for that moment. And trust me, when it comes, it's going to change everything. And just when it felt like the situation had already reached its peak, it flipped again. Because right when the internet thought it had finally started to figure things out, when people began questioning the narrative, pulling back and asking for proof, a new development started circulating. And this one? It didn't add clarity, it added more confusion. According to a fresh wave of posts, there may be clarification coming. Not rumors, not speculation, but something direct. Something that could either confirm what people have been saying or completely shut it all down. Now pause. Because that changes everything. Up until now, this situation has been driven by the internet. Posts, reactions, assumptions. But if an actual response is coming, then for the first time, the narrative might shift away from speculation and toward reality. But here's where things get even more intense. Because while some people are waiting for that clarification, others are already reacting as if the damage is done. And that's the problem. Because once a story reaches this level, even if it gets corrected, the impact doesn't just disappear, the narrative doesn't just reset. People remember what they saw first, not what they learned later. And that means even if this entire situation turns out to be exaggerated or misunderstood, the effect is already real. The names are already attached, the conversations have already happened. And that's what makes this final twist so important. Because now we're not just waiting for truth. We're waiting to see how much of the story can actually be undone. But it doesn't stop there, because another detail started circulating quietly. One that hasn't fully gone viral yet, but is starting to pick up attention. And this one raises a deeper question. According to some users, the original situation that sparked all of this may have been taken from a completely different context. Something unrelated, something that got reworded, reshaped, and then pushed into a narrative that no longer reflects what actually happened. Now think about that, because if that's true, then this entire situation, the chaos, the reactions, the viral explosion, was built on something that wasn't even meant to be interpreted this way. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because it means the story didn't just grow, it transformed, mine into something bigger than the original truth. And once that transformation happens, it's almost impossible to reverse. But here's the most chilling part, because even as people start to realize this, the story is still moving, still spreading, still being discussed. And that means one thing. We're not at the end, we're in the middle. Because the next phase of this situation, that's going to determine everything. Whether it gets confirmed, whether it gets corrected, or whether it continues evolving into something even bigger. Meanwhile, all eyes are now on one thing. The response. Because eventually, someone is going to say something, a statement, a post, a clarification, something that addresses everything that's been said. And when that happens, it's going to hit hard. Because it's either going to validate the narrative or completely collapse it. But here's the catch. Because even if it collapses, not everyone is going to accept it. Some people will still believe what they saw, what they heard, what they felt in the moment. And that's what makes this so unpredictable, because this isn't just about facts anymore. It's about perception. And perception, that's much harder to control. So now we're here, right at the edge, waiting, watching, trying to figure out what happens next. Because whatever comes next, it's not just going to affect this situation, it's going to define it. Was this a real story that got exposed, or a misunderstanding that got out of control? Because the answer to that question is coming, and when it does, it's going to change everything again. So the real question is, when that moment finally hits, will the truth calm everything down? Or will it create an even bigger explosion? Because right now, it could go either way. Now I want you to stop for a second and really think about everything we just went through. Because this wasn't just another viral moment. This was a perfect example of how fast things can go from unclear to completely out of control. So let me ask you, what do you actually believe? Do you think there's truth behind what started all of this? Or do you think this is a situation that got completely exaggerated by the internet? Was this a real story that people uncovered? Or a misunderstanding that spiraled into something much bigger than it was ever supposed to be? And here's the real question. Do you trust what you saw first? Or are you waiting for the full picture before deciding? Because, let's be honest, most people don't wait. They react, they pick a side, and by the time the truth comes out, their opinion is already locked in. So I need you to go down to the comments right now and tell me, which side are you on? Are you believing the narrative? Or are you questioning everything? Because this conversation, it's not over, not even close. More updates could drop at any moment. More clarification could come out. And the next piece of information, it might be the one that finally answers everything, or makes the situation even more confusing than it already is. So make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because the moment something new happens, you're going to want to be the first to know, and trust me. The next update, it's going to hit even harder. Stay ready.